Do you have your Bibles? Get your Bibles out. We're going to be in Ephesians chapter 4. If you were with us last week, we started, I told you this before, I don't really preach series. I just preach one sermon that takes me 4 weeks to get through. So right now we're in the midst of one sermon that's going to take me a few weeks to get through. But last week I told you that about every 2 years I preach the same exact message. It's always a little bit better. I add some things to it. But I preach the same message around one of our core values, one of the foundational principles we live by here at the church. And the reason I do that, so for some of you that have been with us for a long time, you're going to have heard what I've talked about, but you need to hear it again, and you need to be reminded again of kind of what some of the underlying principles and foundation that we as a church are building. But also, one of the things I realized was, in essence, since we replanted in January, so many new people are here, so many new faces. It's been such a joy to get to know so many of you guys that I also want to kind of give you kind of part of what our culture is. I think it's important because, in order to kind of have clarity in what we're building, but also be able to contribute to it. I think that as we look around, you'll be able to see, oh, this is why they're doing what they're doing, but also to be able to participate and contribute to that. You have to know kind of the core values and the foundational principles that we operate off of. And so last week what I mentioned was this. I'm going to read Ephesians 4, but it was just this concept. Church is a family, not a business. And we would all applaud that. We would say, yes, we believe that. I'm just not sure we're really taking the time to dive deeper in what does that actually mean that church is a family and not a business. I mentioned last week that this has nothing to do with church size for me. It's a culture issue, that this is something that we embrace culturally, that church is a family, not a business. And the reason why we mentioned this thing last week was because how you view something determines how you engage with it or interact with it. So a lot of believers, and if you're new to the faith in here, if you're a new believer, if you really didn't grow up in church, some of what I'm talking today might be a little bit foreign to you. For those that have grown up in church, for those that have been around for any length of time, you're going to get what I'm talking about today and what I want to challenge in regards to how we view things. But for so many of us, how you view something determines how you interact with it. So we talked about this. When I go into a restaurant, it's a restaurant, and I'm going to interact with it that way. But if I view my house as a restaurant, it's problematic. And I'm going to be confused, and I'm going to be upset. And when I walk into my house thinking it's a restaurant, sit down at my dining room table, confused why nobody's coming over to serve me, why nobody's brought me any bread or brought me any water or taking my order, it's because it's not a restaurant, it's a house. So we have to constantly make sure that how we're viewing the church is actually how God intended it. How did God intend the church to be? Because if I'm interacting it with some other way, I'm going to be confused. I'm going to be discouraged, but here's the bigger thing. I'm not going to get the fullness of what God has for me from the community he calls church. And if you view it as a business, the problem is this, is that for most businesses, the goal and the nature of business is to sell you something. The goal is to sell you something. And the way that they do that is they make life easier for you. They're either telling you you're incomplete without something, or they're trying to remove a struggle from your life. And we are suckers for this. If you make my life easier, if you remove a struggle, if you give me more convenience, I'll buy whatever you're selling. I mean, this is a crazy thing. Things have to be faster. They have to be more convenient. That's what the world is in right now. Faster and more convenient. Faster and no struggle. I mean, this is the crazy part. I will go spend $1,000 for a new iPhone. And if somebody asks me, why'd you get the new iPhone? Did your old iPhone break? Nope. It still works. It was doing everything you needed. Yep, did everything I needed. What's new about this iPhone? It's a second faster. They're like, what do you mean by that? I mean, I can't be inconvenienced to wait 3 seconds for something to load on my phone. So I bought this because it loads in 2 seconds. You're laughing, but this is the truth. So businesses, the nature of business is to try to remove struggle. But here's the problem. We talked about this. Is that so all of a sudden God's not interested. This is what our pastor Bill says. God's not interested in your convenience. He's interested in your growth. But that doesn't make sense in a restaurant. It makes sense in a family. And that's what I want to unpack today. There's a ton of things in the church that if you think it's a business, it's not going to make sense. But if you understand it's a family, all of a sudden it makes sense. That was the illustration last week about Thanksgiving. Never once at Thanksgiving has somebody said, hey, can you set these tables up? And I look at them and go, what, are you trying to get free labor out of me? Is that what it's good? You just trying to get free labor? You just need free labor. I've never said that once, ever, at any family gathering, ever. Have I yelled at them when they ask me to help because I think they're just trying to get free labor out of me? But if, listen, but if I show up to a restaurant, I'm like, I'd like this, I'd like to order this meal. They're like, hey, listen, any way you could bust that table over there? Like, I'm offended at that. I'm like, what? I'm not going to bust this. I'm not going to bust your table. Like, are you tracking with me on that thing? At my house, if somebody says, can you go clean that table up? Not a problem. At a restaurant, can you go clean that table up? I have a problem. It's the same exact act. It's different environments. So how I view the environment matters. Everybody with me on this? Online is, I know it. Online, are you with me on this? I know you are. They're just falling out in the spirit all over right now. That's what I believe. Ephesians chapter 4. Ephesians chapter 4. Paul, who, was built so much of the New Testament, handed us the structure of what New Testament church is and what church government is. Paul in Ephesians chapter 4 is introducing the fivefold ministry. He's introducing the fivefold governmental leadership offices of the structure in the church. And then he's introducing these, what he calls gifts from Jesus. He's introducing them, but then he's going to describe what they're doing and the purpose of them. This gives us kind of insight into what God's trying to do in our life through the church. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 11 says this. So Christ himself gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the pastors, and teachers, fivefold. And here's why he gave them. To equip his people for the works of service, so that, here's his goal, the body of Christ may be built up until we all reach unity in the faith and in the knowledge of the Son of God, and here it is, and become mature, attaining to the whole measure of the fullness of Christ. If you want to ask, I'm going to challenge a few things this morning, but listen to me right now. My heart and passion above all else is this, that you would experience the fullness of Christ. I think there are things that you can only experience fullness of Christ when you engage with them properly. Verse 14, then we will no longer be infants, tossed back and forth by the waves and blown here and there by every wind of teaching, and by the cunning and craftiness of people and their deceitful scheming. Instead, speaking of the truth and love, we will grow to become in every respect the mature body of him who is the head, that is Christ. Before we go on, I want you to see that Paul, even in how he's setting up governmental structure, he still is using family language. He's saying, well, why do we want that, Paul? Because we no longer want you to be infants, but we want you to mature. Listen to this. We want you to grow to become in every respect in the mature body of him who is the head of Christ. This is family language. If the goal of business is to sell you something, and they do that by removing struggle, making it easier, the goal of family is to grow you and mature you. That's the goal of family. As a father, my responsibility to my kids is to make sure they're growing and maturing in every aspect of their life. I want them to be healthy, and I want them to grow physically. I want them to grow intellectually. I want them to grow mentally. I want them to grow emotionally. I want them to grow spiritually. That's the goal. And the goal as a parent is not just to raise sons and daughters, but to raise fathers and mothers. The goal is that sons and daughters would grow until they become fathers and mothers who have sons and daughters who then mature their sons and daughters so they become fathers and mothers. That's the goal. That's the goal. And so when that's the goal, in family context, if somebody stops growing, it's alarming. Just if my son at 7 had stopped physically growing, we would pause. It would be like something's wrong. And you know who else would be interested in this and concerned? His siblings, his aunts and uncles, his grandparents. They would all be in the same spot. They're like, what's going on? We're like, I don't know. He stopped growing. We're going to take him to the doctor. We're going to find out. I take him to the doctor. I say, doctor, I'm concerned. My son is not growing. and his grandparents are concerned, and his aunts and uncles are concerned, and his cousins are concerned, and his siblings are concerned. And then we'd come back, they'd want to know what's going on. Because the goal of family is people growing, maturing in every aspect. The problem is that some people come into church and somebody says, I don't think you're growing. They're like, whoa, bro, mind your own business. Why? What's going on there? Because they think they just walked into a restaurant where a waiter came up and said, how's your marriage? I'd like the filet. Hey, before we get to the filet, how you guys doing like with your marriage and stuff? Like that's like, whoa, hold on a second. What just happened here? But in family, the goal is 100% growth. The Holy Spirit was given to you to sanctify you, mature you, grow you. Fivefold, church, it's all around this thing. And so this begins to make sense because one of the things that then makes sense in a family that doesn't make sense at a restaurant is this. One of the main markers of maturity is this concept, personal responsibility. If you want to see if somebody's maturing, you watch their personal responsibility. My kids, I could tell. My kid, when they were little, they were not cleaning their room. They have a room, they were uninterested in cleaning it. They thought it was my job to clean their room. They thought it was my job to do that. But as they get older, you begin to see them, okay, all right, they're starting to take responsibility for their room. They're starting to, now they haven't taken responsibility for their house, but they're taking responsibility for their room. And you can tell there's a maturing happening. I don't have to yell at them every day to go brush their teeth. My son, when he was little, if I didn't actually parent him, he would have never changed his clothes, never brushed his teeth, lived on a cup of noodles, Sour Patch Kids. But eventually, right, and what is that called? That's immaturity. I'm not mad at him about it. I'm not yelling at him about it. I'm just like, he's immature. But my job is to help him mature to where eventually he's not living on that. He's taking responsibility for a room. And then if you're a parent, if he comes down and like cleans the kitchen without anybody asking him, like I just want to pass out with just joy. I'm just like, what just happened? Because my son's maturing. He's growing. One of the main markers of maturity is personal responsibility. Here's where this plays out in the church and family. Is that for so many of us, we don't realize it, but when we come to church, we're coming to church not for church to equip us, edify us, and mature us, but to do our Christian life for us. I just want to paint this picture again. I go to a restaurant because I don't want to cook. I go to a restaurant because I don't want to clean up. That's why I go to a restaurant. But I don't go to a family that way. And so for many of us, what we don't realize is we're approaching the church to not equip us, encourage us, send us, mature us, but to do our Christian life for us. When you got saved, you became a follower of Jesus. And now that I'm following Jesus, here's what happens. He turns around and says, all right, Benny, this is what I want. This is what I'm asking of you. Pray. Be generous. Disciple people. Share your faith. Give to the poor. Take care of orphans and widows. That's the mandate for everybody in this room as a follower of Jesus. What happens is we come to the church not looking to be equipped to do what God's called us to do, but looking for the church to do what God's called us to do. Because we don't see it as a family, we see it as a business. We don't see it as a family where we're to grow and mature. We see it as a business to be able to do and interact. There's an exchange that happens for you to do. This would be my example. I told you last week that when I met CJ, I was convinced she came from a family of anarchists because they did life so much differently than I did. Like I come from a very orderly home. Everything's got order and there's structure. And then, and so in that world for me, pets were not a part of my childhood. I didn't have pets growing up. I think we had one and that didn't last. And so it was that type of thing. So then I married CJ, and guys, I'm not exaggerating this point right now. I married a zookeeper. I married a zookeeper. We will be married 25 years next month. And thank you very much. And you know where our 25-year anniversary is going to be? At a tournament watching basketball. I'm going to be on my 25th anniversary watching a game. So anyways, I married CJ. And in 25 years, I cannot describe, I mean, it's hamsters and birds and dogs and cats and chickens and ducks. And it's just insane the amount of like animals that we've had over the years. But what she really loves above everything else is dogs. Like that's her above all else, But not just dogs, this one dog in particular, his name's Dash. He's a golden retriever. He's 11 years old now. And my wife loves this dog so much. All I have to do for Christmas for her is get her something. Like she would literally be that person that wears a shirt of her dog around. Like it's embarrassing. And I bought her an iPhone cover with the dog on the back saying, I love you forever. And she's just so happy. She's just, I love you too, Dad. And she told me a couple years ago, she said, Banning, you know how you're just sitting around with your spouse one day and they're just thinking, she looks at me, she goes, hey, I just need you to know that if our house catches on fire and somehow you're injured and can't make it out, I'm saving the dog. And she said, it's been a good ride. I'll see you on the other side. I love you, but I'm taking Dash. I'll save him. I'm like, we stood in front of people and made a covenant vows. But when we first got Dash was this, again, I don't come from this life. Chewed everything. I mean, just tore the entire backyard up, ate the entire drip system. I had to get online and go, how do you get a dog to not eat your entire drip system? And somebody said on there, coat it in cayenne pepper. I went to Costco, got the biggest cayenne pepper thing I could get. I'm in my backyard just putting cayenne pepper on the drip system. The next day, Dash ate the entire drip system. I literally think he thought, somebody just seasoned this for me. This is delightful. And chewing holes through walls, tearing up entire sections of carpet on the stairs. I mean, the minute you'd open the door, gone. I mean, if the door was open, we're like, shut the door! Like, you have that, like, you hear a door, shut the door! Because if you open the door, he's just gone, just running off. Wouldn't walk on a leash. I mean, just would choke himself. He would pull so hard, he'd just choke himself on the leash. So about a year in, I said, CJ, I can't do this anymore. We have to get this dog trained. So I had seen at Petco, there was like, 10 classes for $180 of dog training. I'm like, done. Gave him my money. First class comes up. I'm walking Dash in. And I'm walking him from the car. He's choking himself the entire time. I'm talking about like the whole time. I'm like, stop. And just chokes himself all the way in. I sit down in the class, and he's just dry heaving the first 5 minutes, just like, because he just choked himself from the car. And I'm totally in here going like, I don't really need to be at this class. He's well trained, but. So the lady comes in, and she starts talking. And about 10 minutes into the first class, I noticed she's not talking to my dog, she's talking to me. And I'm like, why are you talking to me? I'm not the problem. I am in no way the problem. Fix my dog. But I thought it's the introductory class, so she kind of talks to us the whole time. I come back the next week, and I notice she's still talking to me, not my dog. And I'm like, lady, listen, fix my dog. I need you to get my dog to walk on a leash. I need you to get my dog to stop digging. I need you to get my dog to stop chewing everything. Fix my dog. What I realized was that dog training classes don't actually train dogs. They're there to help me out in how to train my dog. I was mad. I'm like, dude, I can get on YouTube if I want to see somebody tell it. Like, I paid money for you to train my dog. 10 classes, I went to 2 of them and never went back. And our dog today is super well behaved. But that's the thing. This is how believers come to church. Listen, I'm talking to believers who've been around for a while here. Because we think it's a business, not a family, we come to church, and here's what we're asking. We're not looking for the fivefold to equip us, to encourage us, to mature us so that we can do all that God's called us to do. We're looking for the church to do what God's called us to do. We walk in and say, what are you doing to take care of what God's called me to? You're quiet, but listen. What was fascinating to me, guys, my heart for you is that you would experience the fullness of Christ. Here's the problem. You cannot remain immature your whole life. And let me just say this, because this sounds harsh. We all have areas of immaturity in our life that God's trying to grow. The rest of my life, he will be maturing me. And also, there's just different, God's not like upset. Like I'm just telling you, I'm not looking at my 3-year-old going, unbelievable. How could you like be 3 years old? How could you, why don't you have a job yet? Like it's just, you know, like God walks with us. He understands. We grow. We have areas of immaturity that he's trying to mature. And there's all this type of stuff. But the goal is that you would mature. The goal is that every area of your life would mature, that you'd grow. But if we come and are expecting the church to do my Christian life for me, you will remain immature. It's fascinating. When we planted the church, we planted, and you know, I have a simple church model anyways. Like I have a pretty simple church philosophy. But when we planted, there was a very simple church. It was Sundays and a couple community gatherings we do every once in a while and doing kids well. But, you know, people, you know, we had a name. You know, we brought like 7 famous worship leaders and a whole bunch of people came. But it wasn't like unsaved people. There was a bunch of believers that came. Been in church a long time. And it was fascinating to me in having conversations with them about how people didn't know how to do what God had called them to do unless I built something. So they would, you know, somebody might come and say, hey, how do I get plugged in to community around here? Now listen, we have small groups, like we have them, life on life groups. Some of the greatest testimonies right now happening in our church are happening in life on life groups. We have a structure of life on life groups. But we didn't have any small group then. And so I just said, hey, they said, hey, how do I get plugged into community around here? It's like, man, I don't know. Invite someone over to your house for dinner. I'm looking at him. He's awkwardly looking away. I'm not like, I'm just using you as an example, man. I'm not actually challenging you in your community right now, all right? But he doesn't want to make contact. I want you to look right at me. There we go. God's speaking to you. God's speaking to you about this. But they would come up and they say, hey, how do I get plugged into community around here? I'm like, I don't know, man. I don't know. I'd take somebody to invite somebody over for dinner. And they were like stuck. I remember them just like, wait, what? No, like, no. Like, what kind of small group structure you got going on for me to get plugged into? I'm like, well, we don't have a small group structure right now. Well, how am I getting plugged into community? Go to Starbucks with somebody. It was fascinating to me that people didn't know how to actually get in community unless something was built for them. I full on want to challenge this thinking. I'm all for structure. I'm just not for structure that takes all responsibility away from you for doing what God's called you to do, which, by the way, is part of that is community. In other words, if we never had a small group structure, would you still be moving towards community? If we never had a small group structure, would you still be saying, we need to be in people's lives, and they need to be in my life, and who am I discipling, and who are we running with, and who, like, because that's just what it is to be a follower of Jesus. It might be that somebody comes up and just says, and I'm not opposed to new believers classes or anything like that. That's not my point, but somebody might come up and go, my neighbor just got saved. Where's the new believers class? I'm looking at you again. Where's the new believers class? In your living room. And guess who the leader is? I anoint you in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Because here's the deal. This is going to sound crazy. But it's not church leadership's job to disciple your neighbor. It's church leadership's job to equip you, to encourage you, to make sure you're an effective discipler. Do you realize that I share my faith, I disciple people, I get in community, I give to the poor, and do you know I do none of that because I'm a pastor? I don't do that because I get paid to do that. I do that because I'm a Christian. Sometimes people might say, like, what's our church do for the poor? Now listen, we do stuff for the poor. The 501c3 organization does stuff for the poor. We partner with Food Bank, and we partner with homeless stuff, and we do stuff. But when people say, what's our church doing for the poor? That's what they're asking. And my response is, I'm talking to you again, young man. My response is, it's a conviction of God up here in this front row, man. The response is this, what I want to say is, I don't know what our church is doing for the poor. I don't know what you're doing for the poor. I don't know what everybody here is doing for the poor. The point is this, if I'm a follower of Jesus and he looks at me and says, take care of the poor, take care of the orphan, take care of the widow. If your church never had a food bank, if your church never gave, would you still lean in and say, God, what's my part to play in the mandate as a follower of Jesus to take care of the poor in my city? See, what has to shift is, the reason why this is so important is because the Christian life, and we love as charismatics to say this, that we're spirit-led people. This is one of the things, we're spirit-filled and spirit-led. The problem is that many people are not actually spirit-led, because spirit-led, personal responsibility is an internal reality. New Testament believers should be led by an internal reality of the Holy Spirit living within you. And one of the main differences between the old covenant and the new covenant is the old covenant is an externally motivated covenant. It was never God's heart, but this is, so what happens is this. What's your name? Brad? Brad. God comes to Brad and says, Brad, obey your parents. Are your parents here? Mom, okay. Obey your mom. And Brad's like, no way, I'm not going to. Then we will stone you. It's old covenant. And Brad's like, okay, I'll obey my mom. There's an external motivation. There's an external motivation. Don't obey your mom, we'll stone you. The new covenant is different. And this is why anybody that ever says that the old covenant, that the law is a higher standard than the new covenant is just wrong. The new covenant is actually a higher standard because the new covenant deals with an internal reality. So the old covenant said, don't commit the act of adultery. The new covenant says, don't lust, an internal reality, unless you're committing adultery. How can, the other one said, don't murder. New covenant says, don't hate somebody. It's the same thing. What happens is this, how can the new covenant require such a high standard? Because what the new covenant has, the old covenant doesn't have, is the Spirit of God has taken up residence within us and is now leading us, driving us. So in other words, the Christian life should be a life inside out, internally led. That's why personal responsibility is so important, because personal responsibility is an internal reality. And here's the crazy thing. It can look the same. We don't realize it, but we have been programmed to be led externally. Here's what I'm trying to get you. I'm trying to get you away from the horse-drawn carriage concept, where a horse is pulling that along. Too many believers are dragged along by external circumstances, rather than an internal combustion engine being driven from the inside. I want you to be driven from the inside, not dragged along in your Christian walk. But what happens is they can look the same. We're programmed this way. Our society is programmed this way. So why do you go the speed limit? Because you have a deep core value about the speed limit? You go the speed limit because there's an external factor in play called a cop sitting on the side of the road that has the right to fine you. So I go the speed limit not because of a core value internally, but because I don't want to get a ticket, external. Why do I work hard? Grades. Why do I go to paycheck? This is what happens. And so it can be, you can be driven by guilt, crisis circumstances. This is what happens as well. A guy that never, doesn't take care of his health at all, and then 40 years old has a heart attack. All of a sudden, he has a change of heart. Now he's like, man, I'm working out, I'm eating good, because an external crisis hit him that is now motivating him. Well, here's my point. This can look the same, but they're different. It's a little bit what I would say like a babysitter and a parent. My daughter, when Ryan, when she was 16, phenomenal babysitter. She was a really great babysitter. But in order for her to do the job, she needed two things. She needed money and a list. So they'd say, hey, we'll give you money, and then she'd come over and they'd provide a list. Make sure you read to her and do her homework with her and feed her and get her in the bath and brush her teeth and put her to bed. My daughter would do all that. So if I showed up, I would see my daughter doing all of that. But here's the difference between her and a parent. One, a parent's not making money, they're losing money. I don't know, if you want to have kids, just understand, you're not going to make money off of them, all right? You're going to lose money. And the return on investment's wonderful. They're beautiful children, but you're going to lose money. So one, parents don't need the motivation of money. But the second thing the parents don't need is they don't need a list. You want to know why they don't have a list? Because they have something that the babysitter doesn't have, which is called an internal burden. And that burden is a mixture of love and personal responsibility. There's a mixture of love and personal responsibility that actually drives them. So why do I feed you? Why does your mom feed you, Brad? Because you're never going to sit there again, are you? That's your new seat. I'm going to just put reserved for Brad. So why? Because she loves. A babysitter does it because that's just their job, and they have a list, and they're getting paid for it. A parent does it because they have a deep sense of responsibility and a love. That's what pushes them towards that stuff. My goal is to get you away from that being dragged along by external things and being led internally. Personal responsibility is one of the main markers of maturity, and that is challenged and grown in family. It's challenged and grown in family. When I go to a restaurant and get up, they're not going like, get your dishes and put them in the sink. They don't do that at a restaurant. They do that in a home. Let me just close with this. This is where, and I know we're streaming and people watch this is where the challenge comes probably in church. I'm going to say some pretty broad statements, but much of the church structure in Western society, at least, has been built more around doing people's Christian life for them than equipping them to do their Christian life. I think it comes from a good heart, and it's almost like we've bought in. Do you know what the 80-20 principle is? The 80-20 principle is 20% of the people do 80% of the work. And so sometimes in the church, we just buy into that thing, and we just know. Not everybody gives, not everybody serves, not everybody does this. So therefore, we need to build a structure to compensate for that. But the problem is the structure that we build in order to compensate for that, I think keeps people in a place of immaturity. And so what examples would be like, so we have a small group structure here, hear me on this, but I think there's a lot of structures in the church that exist simply because believers aren't actually engaged in what God's called them to do. Small groups, which I believe deeply in. Can I keep qualifying that statement every time online? I'm going to keep qualifying everything I'm saying, but I remember I heard a story. There's a foster agency in Tennessee, and the way they got started was they heard a statistic or saw a statistic that there are more foster kids on the waiting list than there are foster parents. So there's more foster kids who need a foster parent than foster parents available. And they said, what if we could shift that? What if we could actually see a movement of foster parents, and that there are more foster parents needing foster kids than there are foster kids needing foster parents? That's what we went after. I think they've actually seen it. I think they've actually now shifted this thing in Tennessee where there's more foster parents. And I thought the same thing. I thought, what would that look like in the church? What if there was 51%? What if there was 60% of the church were mature believers who were all engaging in what God had called them to do? And part of that was this: we're going to disciple people, and we're going to connect people, and we're going to walk in community with people, where they're going to be there for people. How much structure would we need if people were engaged at that level? People may say that feels naive and pipe dream. I'm just telling you, this is what I feel passionate about, though. That if we can get believers engaged, not coming to church saying, what are you doing to build community? But coming to church saying, listen, I need to be equipped, encouraged, edified, mature so that I can build effective community. So that I can be an effective discipler. So I can share my faith. I heard a story, even evangelism. Do you guys know this? That the evangelist, do you know that the call of the evangelist is not to evangelize? Does that sound, heretical? Controversial? Ephesians 4, it's very clear. The role of the evangelist is the same as everybody else. Equip the saints for the work of the service. The role of the evangelist is to raise the water level of evangelism in the body of Christ. The role of the evangelist is to equip believers, because guess whose job it is to evangelize? All of us. It doesn't rest on one individual. It doesn't rest on a handful of people called evangelists. I say that to say, there's a church that I heard about in Latin America. It just ruined me when I heard the story. They don't do salvation calls on Sunday. They get up and they say, hey, we'd like to welcome everybody that got saved this week. If you got saved this week, raise your hand. And all over the room, people would just raise their hand that got saved during the week from people. And they just say, welcome, so glad to have you be a part of the family. Like this is what we're talking about. A company of people leaning in, engaged. Worship team, come up. I'm giving. Listen, guys, you've been with me long enough that I've told you, don't ever give out of guilt, don't ever give out of shame, don't ever give out of pressure. But 100% lean in and ask God. See, for me, what happens is we have a vision. We're going to take a vision offering, not a vision offering. We're taking greater faith offering in December. Next week, we're going to pack a little bit. We've got some goals. We want to raise some money for this place. Do you know the reality is, and this is going to maybe sound harsh, but even special offerings are somewhat built around the fact that not every believer is following the Lord in obedience around finances. That's not to shame anybody or guilt anybody at all. I'm just saying, we build structures around this stuff. We said Thanksgiving last week. We want it to be Thanksgiving every time we gather. And do you know, in my house, if I have a gathering and we have some people come over, I don't care what my personality is. I don't care what your personality is, introvert, extrovert. When somebody walks in your door, you're going to make sure they feel welcomed and loved. You're going to go over and greet them and say hello, and you're going to take their coat, you're going to sit down. If they're new there and they don't know anybody, you're going to immediately make sure you're connecting them with somebody. If you're like, hey, I got to go finish up, getting that turkey ready. Hey, listen, can I introduce you to them and connect and do that type of thing? Because it's your house. When we come into church, we have greeters. They're part of the host teams. I love our greeters. They're outside in their job, because people coming in, maybe they haven't been to church in a long time. Maybe they've never been to church. Maybe they don't know anybody here. And if you've ever been into a room where you don't know anybody, it's an intimidating place. You're kind of walking in and trying to figure things out, and you don't know anybody. So we have greeters to try to somehow just welcome people in and make that. But do you realize it's not the greeter's job to do that? It's all of our jobs to do that. Because if this was our house, you know what happened? Never would I ever let somebody sit by themselves at my house. I'd never walk by somebody sitting on a couch at Thanksgiving and not say, hey, do you not know anybody here? Come sit with me. This is that mentality that's got to shift, that if we come in as a family, I mean, if you're new here, 15 people should be saying hi to you. If you see somebody sitting by themselves, that you should just grab them. This is Brendan and Michael Miller, who are part of our church. They shared with me early on, because we've shared this message a lot over the years. And early on, they said, you know what they decided to do? Every Sunday, they would meet somebody new, in our little 60-second greeting. And they just would talk and ask God. And then they would just pick a couple that they met and just say, hey, can I take you to lunch today? They would just take them to lunch. They were telling me the greatest stories about, this was not a program. I did not have the idea. We did not commission them to do this. They just said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to find some people every Sunday that we don't know and just invite them to lunch. Hear their story a little bit, help them get connected in, find out who they are. I mean, just imagine, it's not just about that story, but imagine if all of us were just leaning in at that level. This is really where I believe that so much maturity happens when we just begin to say, God, I'm going to take personal responsibility for my walk with you.